My sister left that cabin in the rain with a declined credit card and nowhere to go. My mother was sobbing into a wine-soaked napkin. And my father was standing at the door he had just opened, watching them both walk out, his wedding ring sitting in a puddle of red wine on the table behind him. 2 hours earlier, we had all sat down for a normal Labor Day dinner. Let me tell you what happened in between. The cabin had been in my father's family for decades. Tucked back from a lake in the Wisconsin woods, the kind of quiet that only exists when you're 3 hours north of Chicago and far enough from everything that you can actually hear yourself think. Every Labor Day, we made the same drive up through Wisconsin. Every Labor Day, the same people, the same dynamic, the same unspoken rules. Don't upset Lexi. Don't make Mom uncomfortable. Keep the peace. Smile. I had been following those rules my entire life. 32 years of swallowing things that deserved to be said out loud. 32 years of watching my sister do whatever she wanted and watching my mother smooth it over before the dust even settled. My father, Ray, sat at the head of the table every year with his hands folded and his jaw tight and his eyes somewhere far away, and I always told myself he just didn't see it. That he was checked out. That he had given up. I was wrong about that. But I didn't know it yet. Sam had been working on that painting for 3 days. 3 full days. He was 6 years old and he had the kind of focus that most adults would envy. He had sat up at the kitchen table every morning with his little watercolor set, a mason jar of water, and a paper towel he kept folding and refolding to clean his brush. He was painting the lake. The view from the back porch, the water, the tree line, the way the sky looked in the early morning. He had told me it was a gift for his grandfather. He wanted to frame it himself. He had even asked me how to spell for Grandpa Ray so he could write it in the corner. I watched him work on it every morning. The careful way he loaded his brush, the way he squinted at the window and then back at the paper, trying to get the color of the water right. He must have repainted the sky 4 times because he kept saying it wasn't blue enough. He wasn't just making a drawing. He was making something. And he knew the difference. By the afternoon of Labor Day, it was done. He had set it out to dry on the table, flat, carefully positioned away from the edge. He was so proud of it he kept walking over to check on it like it might disappear if he wasn't watching. Lexi arrived at 2 o'clock with a bottle of wine already half gone. She came in loud, the way she always did, filling the room with her presence before she even took off her jacket. She hugged my mother for too long and ignored me and ruffled Sam's hair in the distracted way you do when you don't actually want to touch someone but you know you're supposed to. She set her wine on the counter and started talking about a brand deal she was working on, and my mother hung on every word like she was receiving news from a better world. This was always how it went. Lexi was the interesting one. The one with the followers and the aesthetic and the lifestyle that looked good in photos. I was the one who showed up, helped with dinner, kept my son out of the way, and drove home Sunday night wondering why I always felt like I had just spent the weekend apologizing for existing. It was around 4 in the afternoon when Sam went back to check on his painting. He stood at the table looking at it, and then he called to me from across the room. "Mom, it's dry. Can Grandpa see it now?" Before I could answer, Lexi walked over. She had a fresh glass of wine in her hand. She looked down at the painting with the expression she always used when something didn't interest her, not quite bored, not quite contemptuous, somewhere in between. She tilted her head. "What is this?" "It's for Grandpa," Sam said. "I painted the lake." She looked at it for another second. Then she looked at the table like the painting was taking up space she had a personal claim to. And then, with a casualness that I still can't fully process when I think about it, she tilted her wine glass. Slowly, deliberately, and poured. Dark red wine hit the paper and spread instantly. It bled across the sky Sam had repainted 4 times. It soaked into the tree line. The paper warped and bubbled and the colors ran together into a muddy, ruined mess. The glass came down on top of it with a wet thud. "He needs to learn the world doesn't care about his little doodles," Lexi said. Her voice was loose from the wine but her words were precise. Thought out. It was taking up space. Honestly, he needs to toughen up. She looked around the room. And the room gave her what she wanted. My Uncle Gary, sitting on the couch, slapped his knee. "That's a $50 lesson right there, kid. Toughen up or get eaten." He was laughing. Actually laughing. My cousin smirked. My mother let out a nervous little chuckle, the kind that's not really a laugh, it's just a sound she made when she needed everyone to keep moving so she didn't have to do anything hard. Sam didn't make a sound. That was the part that broke me open. He stood completely still with his hands hovering over the table, just above the ruined painting, not touching it. His shoulders were shaking. His face had gone red and blotchy. His bottom lip was pressed so hard between his teeth it had turned white. He wasn't crying out. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't looking at me for help. He was making himself small. He was doing what I had spent 32 years learning to do. He was compressing himself, pulling inward, becoming as quiet and still as possible so that the thing hunting him would lose interest and move on. He had already learned, at 6 years old, that his pain was entertainment to these people. He had already figured out that the safest move was to disappear. I watched my son and I felt something in my chest crack clean through. Because I knew that posture. I had lived in that posture. The tucked chin, the held breath, the practiced stillness. I had spent my entire childhood in that exact position at this exact table, waiting for the moment to pass so I could breathe again. And now here was my son, my little boy who had spent 3 days painting a lake because he loved his grandfather, standing there bleeding quietly while the adults laughed. He was learning to be me. Not just learning it. Inheriting it. Right in front of my eyes, in real time, the same silence that had been handed to me was being handed to him. And if I did nothing, if I chuckled nervously like my mother or looked at the floor like my father, then I was the one handing it over. I looked at my father. Ray was at the head of the table, hands folded, jaw set. His knuckles had gone white around his fork. The muscle in his jaw was jumping. He wasn't checked out. He wasn't far away. He was right there, and he was holding something in so hard it looked like it was costing him physically. I stood up. The chair scraped back against the wood floor so hard it cut through the laughing like a gunshot. I didn't rush. I didn't scramble for paper towels. I walked around the table and put myself directly between Lexi and Sam. I used my body as a wall. I didn't look at the painting. I looked at her. The laughing stopped. You enjoyed that, I said. My voice was quiet, flat. I wasn't yelling, I had moved past yelling into something colder. You watched a 6-year-old spend 3 days making something, and you enjoyed destroying it. Lexi rolled her eyes. She turned to the sideboard and picked up the wine bottle to refill her glass. Her movements were loose and careless, the performance of someone who has never once been held accountable. Oh, Delilah. Don't be so dramatic. It's paper. I did him a favor. Now he can learn to do something useful instead of making messes. Useful, I said. I let the words sit there. The room went completely still. Lexi's smirk flickered. The glass paused halfway to her mouth. My mother sucked in a sharp breath and I knew exactly what was coming next, the intervention, the redirect, the desperate cheerful energy she deployed whenever reality got too close to the surface. And there she was. My mother, Marlene, came rushing in from the side of the room with a fistful of napkins. She went straight to the table and started wiping. Not to Sam. Not to hug him, not to check on him, not to even look at him. She went to the wood. She was scrubbing the wine off the table surface, completely ignoring the destroyed painting sitting right there, completely ignoring the child standing right there. Oh, Lexi, you're so clumsy. Her voice was pitched high and tight, vibrating with that specific energy she got when she needed everyone to stand down and play along. Delilah, don't make a face, it was an accident. We can get him a nice coloring book. One with stickers. Let's just have a nice dinner, it's Labor Day, we're family, let's just. I had felt sorry for my mother for most of my life. I had understood her, made excuses for her, told myself she was just scared, just overwhelmed, just doing her best with a difficult situation. But standing there watching her scrub the table while her grandson stood 2 feet away shaking, I felt the pity drain out of me completely. She wasn't confused. She wasn't helpless. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had always known. My mother was not a victim of this family. She was the infrastructure that kept it running. She was the one who smoothed things over fast enough that no one ever had to face consequences. She was the one who decided, over and over again, that keeping Lexi comfortable was worth more than protecting the rest of us. She never paid that cost herself. She taxed us for it, the quiet ones, the ones who wouldn't burn things down. She had been doing it for decades. And now she was doing it to my son. Exactly, Lexi said, refueled by my mother's defense. She leaned back in her chair and swirled her glass. The arrogance was back, full strength. He's too soft. Delilah babies him. I'm doing him a favor. That's how the real world works. You don't get a trophy for doodling. That was the moment. That specific sentence. Something in me just finished. And then my father stood up. He didn't do it fast. He did it slow. The way a very large, very old structure shifts before it comes down, a deep creak, a settling of weight, a sound like something that has been under pressure for a very long time finally releasing. He pushed back from the table and he stood up and the room changed. Ray walked to the fireplace mantel where a wooden sign had hung for as long as I could remember. Family is forever in painted cursive. He stood in front of it for a moment with his back to us. Then he turned around. You wiped the table, he said to Marlene. His voice was low, controlled. The kind of quiet that is much more serious than shouting. You didn't check on the boy. You worried about the wood. My mother's hands stopped moving. Ray, I'm just trying to keep. You're trying to keep the peace, he said. But there is no peace, Marlene. There is just silence. And I am done paying for it. He looked down at his left hand. His wedding ring had been on that finger for 40 years. It was deep set, buried in the flesh of his knuckle the way rings get after decades. He walked to the kitchen sink, pumped dish soap onto his hand, and started working it off. It was hard to watch. He was grimacing, twisting and pulling, and the ring resisted. It didn't want to come off, or maybe it felt that way because of everything it represented. And then it came free with a wet pop. He walked back to the table. He held the ring over the wine-soaked painting. And he let it go. It hit the wet paper with a dull, flat sound. A tiny splash of red. It sat there in the puddle, surrounded by the ruin of my son's 3 days of work. I am done keeping your peace, Ray said. And I am done protecting you. The silence after that was not just quiet. It was total. The kind of silence where you can hear the blood in your own ears. My mother stared at the ring like it was something she couldn't process. Lexi let out a short, sharp laugh, the nervous kind, the kind you use to fill space when you're scared and don't want anyone to know it. Dad, are you serious right now? She said. You're going to divorce Mom over a $5 watercolor set? That's pathetic. Ray didn't look at her. He walked to the corner of the room where his travel bag was sitting and unzipped it. He pulled out a thick black leather notebook. It was old, the spine cracked, the edges worn soft. He carried it back to the table and set it down with a weight that felt intentional. I've been a structural engineer for 40 years, he said. My job is to find stress fractures. To track failures before the building comes down. He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with columns. Dates. Numbers. His handwriting, small, precise, perfectly even. 3 years ago, he said, running his finger down the first page. You told me you needed $5,000. Business loan. New equipment for your brand. Lexi crossed her arms. I paid most of that back. You didn't pay back $1, Ray said. But that's not the main point. He turned the page. I started keeping track. Not just the big amounts. Everything. Every time your mother said she needed grocery money. Every time there was a home repair that never happened. Every time the savings account dropped for an emergency I couldn't account for. He turned the book around so they could both see the columns. And then I hired a forensic accountant to trace where the money actually went. My mother made a sound, small, strangled, like something closing off in her throat. Ray, please. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Everyone needs to hear this, he said. Because everyone in this room has spent years watching Delilah get treated like she was less than. Watching Sam get laughed at. Acting like that was normal. Like she was the problem. Like he was the problem. He looked at me then, and his eyes held something I had never seen in them before. Something that looked like grief. And apology. Real apology, not the reflexive kind. I let this happen, Delilah. I let you think you were less than her. I'm sorry. He turned back to the notebook. This isn't a list of loans, Lexi. He pulled a folded paper from the back and placed it on the table next to the ring. This is a ledger. And the total is $174,000. Lexi laughed again, but this time it didn't land right. That's insane. You're making that up. August 14th, 2 years ago, he said, reading directly from the page. 12,000. You said brand partnership buy-in. April 3rd, last year. 8,000. Medical bills. He looked up. But the largest transfer was 3 years ago. Labor Day weekend. The party we didn't attend because your mother said she was sick. Marlene was shaking her head. Fast, desperate, tears already running. Ray. Stop. Please. You told me, Ray said, that it was a parking dispute. That it was handled. He turned the page. Taped to the paper was a copy of a police report. The room tilted. 3 years ago, Ray said, Lexi drove home from a party drunk. She hit a parked car. And then she hit a pedestrian. A 19-year-old girl walking her dog. I heard my own breath come out of me. I remembered that time. Lexi had been traveling for a month. Mom had told everyone she was in Europe, finding herself, taking a break. I had thought it was strange, the timing, the vagueness, but I hadn't pushed. I never pushed. She didn't stop, Ray said. She left the scene. A hit and run. Marlene found out. And instead of calling the police, instead of making sure that girl's family got justice, she called a lawyer. She used our retirement account. She paid a settlement to keep it out of civil court. She paid the repair shop to fix the car off the books. And she told me it was a parking dispute. Marlene's face was in her hands now. Her whole body was rocking. You stole our future, Ray said, to cover up her crime. And then you let her sit at this table and destroy a child's painting and laugh about it. You taught her that destruction has no consequences. You built that. Both of you. He closed the notebook. The sound it made was like a period at the end of the longest sentence anyone had ever spoken. Lexi stood up. She smoothed her dress. She was trying to pull the arrogance back together. You could see it, the effort, the way she was assembling herself piece by piece. She lifted her chin. So what? She said. Her voice had an edge of real desperation under the performance. It was an accident. Mom helped me. That's what mothers do. Unlike you. She glared at Ray. You were never there. Mom loves me more and you know it. I don't need your money. I have my own brand. I have my own following. I don't need this cabin. Ray looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't a father looking at a daughter. It was an engineer looking at a structure that had already failed. Detached. Clear-eyed. You have nothing, he said. He reached into the back of the notebook and placed a second document on the table. A property deed. Flat and official and final. This cabin is in my name. My father's inheritance. Marlene's name is not on the deed. He smoothed the page. You have 1 hour to collect your things and leave. All of you. Marlene included. I'm listing it tomorrow to start recovering what was taken. You can't do this, Marlene wailed. It's raining, Ray. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, Ray said. Maybe you can stay with the daughter you invested so much in. He turned back to Lexi. As of 10 minutes ago, I froze the joint accounts. I've reported the transfers as fraud pending forensic review. The bank has locked everything, your cards, your mother's cards, the business account you route money through. Lexi pulled out her phone immediately, fingers flying. I watched her open her banking app. I watched her face change. First confusion, then a kind of blankness. Then the color just drained away, like water going down a drain, and she was left standing there pale and small in her expensive dress, and I could see it, the moment the costume stopped working. It's declined, she whispered. And that was it. That was the whole thing. Everything that Lexi was, the confidence, the contempt, the power she had used to control every room she walked into, it ran on money she had never earned. It ran on a line of credit she had been quietly draining from our parents for years. Pull the funding and there was nothing underneath. No substance. No self. Just a woman in clothes she hadn't paid for, in a life that had always been alone. My Uncle Gary, who had been laughing 20 minutes earlier, was now very interested in the floor. Lexi looked at my mother. My mother was useless, folded over herself, crying into her hands. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide and wet, and for just a second I saw something real in them. Not the Lexi who poured wine on a child's painting. Not the golden child, the influencer, the favored one. Just a 33-year-old woman who was genuinely terrified and genuinely alone, and for the first time in her life had no one to call. Delilah. Her voice cracked. Tell him he's being crazy. You can't let him do this to me. I'm your sister. I looked at her. I looked at the ring in the wine. I looked at my son, who was standing quietly beside me, watching everything with wide eyes but not shaking anymore. Not frozen. Just watching. You should hurry, I said. Traffic's going to be bad in the Wisconsin rain. 6 months later, the apartment my father rented was smaller than anything he'd lived in for 40 years. Second floor of a building in Lincoln Square, 2 bedrooms, big windows that let in white afternoon light. No lake view. No wraparound porch. None of the things the cabin had that looked like peace but never actually was. It was the most peaceful place I had ever been. I was sitting on the floor against the wall one Saturday afternoon, just watching. My father was on his knees on a drop cloth in the living room. Sam was beside him, both of them covered in sawdust, working on a project with a miter box and strips of wood. Sam was building a frame for a new painting. Measure twice, my father said. Patient. Unhurried. A voice I barely recognized because it had never been able to sound like that before, not in the cabin, not at that table, not in the house where silence was always a performance and patience was always conditional. Precision matters. If the frame is strong, the art stays safe. Like this, Grandpa? Sam was concentrating hard, tongue poking out, sawing carefully along a pencil line. Exactly like that. I watched them and I thought about everything that had been broken to get to this room. This light. This Saturday. My mother was living in a condo in Naperville. She sent letters sometimes. Long, looping, expensive letters on good stationery, full of language about family and image and cruelty and how we had humiliated her. I read the first few lines of the first one, enough to understand what they were, and I burned the rest in the kitchen sink without opening them. She was still trying to collect. Still trying to charge us for a piece that had never existed. We had just stopped paying the bill. Lexi was working a kiosk at Woodfield Mall. Phone accessories. The fraud investigation had opened a tax audit, and the legal fees were eating her alive. She had sold her car. She was in a studio apartment. The life she had performed online, the aesthetic, the brand, the carefully curated proof that she was winning, had gone quiet. No new posts. No new content. Just the ordinary, unremarkable reality of a person who had to pay for things herself for the first time at 33. I didn't feel good about that. But I didn't feel bad about it either. I felt nothing much, which was its own kind of peace. What I did feel, what I felt every day in that apartment, every time I watched my son, was relief. The specific relief of something that has been pressing on you for so long you stopped noticing the weight, and then it's gone, and you can breathe all the way down. Sam spilled a little wood glue that afternoon. It ran off the edge of the drop cloth onto the hardwood floor, and I waited for the flinch, the freeze, the careful stillness, the thing I had watched him do for months whenever something went wrong around the adults. He grabbed a rag and wiped it up. Just like that. He didn't even pause. He said oops and moved on and kept sawing. He didn't flinch. That was the thing. That small, ordinary moment of a kid making a mess and not being afraid of what would happen next. That was what we had paid for. That was the whole trade. We broke the family to save the people. We burned the structure down to protect what was actually worth saving. My father taught my son to frame his art that day. Precisely. Carefully. Because if the frame is strong, the art stays safe. I don't know who needed to hear that. But I think some of you did. Thanks for listening, and if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about the moments when ordinary people finally stop being quiet and change everything. The most expensive thing you'll ever pay for is a piece that was never real.